Hello, my name is Nicole,
Hi, I'm Callie.
and we are from ECS 410 Assessment, and we're here to collaborate and talk about our individual videos as well as pose questions regarding each other's individual videos. So,
Yeah. So regarding assessment, this was a great class. This kind of took us through the theory of assessment, and made us introspect what our assessment philosophy is. And we kind of addressed this within our individual videos, but I think maybe as a nice collaborative piece to bring those together within this particular part of the assignment as well. So I'm Callie, and my assessment philosophy was previously and more or less remains the same, which is being tied to the practice of constant and student-focused assessment. We're wanting to have these students help us drive instruction. And as teachers, we want to provide timely, constructive, engaging, and encouraging feedback, right? So we want to put our students' learning experience within their control and to propel the student forward, not to use assessment as a tactic to knock them down a peg, and certainly not to discourage them and shame them.
my assessment philosophy was kind of non-existent before this class because, oops. But like Callie said, it should not be there to diminish students or like knock them down, but to help them and help them improve and provide them tools to succeed in life. That is my goal as an educator. I also believe that students should know how to fulfill the requirements. So for an assignment, like whether you give them a rubric or a checklist, etc., there should be no surprises, kind of thing. As well, could be multimodal. Assessment could be multimodal and cater to the needs of students, but also set up in such a way that the assignment will every so often push the student out of their comfort zone. So
Absolutely. And Nicole just talked about ultimately the goal of education, and our roles as teachers are to equip students for life within the 21st century and to help them to gain skills so they could live as independently as possible. And obviously, that independence will vary from student to student. But while we're assessing them, we're also giving them critical thinking tools. As teachers, we may have to help shepherd them through the process of self-reflection, and we may have to shepherd them through the process of peer reflection, but those are both very important assessment methods to gauge and to help our students work through, because that will help them in the future in terms of, networking and working with others, which are both 21st century competencies.
So, just a quick question. When you say shepherding, you mean like kind of guiding them?
Yeah, I do.
But how much is too much of guidance?
I think you can have too much guidance. Where did I say that here? I think that you want to give students the ability to critically think.
And like do things like independently, or like be able to like not necessarily figure it out themselves, but provide them like with that life skill of problem solving and
absolutely problem solving. And I don't think that you want to trip students up. You want to help guide them, and obviously you don't want to spoon feed, and you want to develop independence and critical thinking. But at the same time, if a student is tripped up even on a simple term, they may or may not know the definition, so you want to try to guide them through that. But yeah, certainly you don't want to spoon feed them and baby them, because you're ultimately trying to foster independence. Yeah.
Do you want to get into the questions?
Sure.
Game show?
We'll game show it.
Game show it.
So
so if we ask a question and you don't want to answer it, you can go and then
pass.
And then perhaps if we have time, we can always come back to it and have like an open discussion in relationship to that question.
Sounds good. So Nicole, throughout your your self-reflection, and it was a really good one. Hats off to you.
Hey.
You talk about assessment taking many forms and catering to individual students. So what are your thoughts about this being such a time-consuming process? We know that it's certainly worth it in the end, but we often hear, particularly towards the end of the school terms and the end of the school year, there's that time crunch where teachers will often have to just grind through things in order to check off outcomes. And I just wondered how you would address.
I think like for like the bigger projects, like you would cater to the students' needs like in such a way that like for place-based learning or inquiry-based learning, you would co-create a rubric, and that way like you hear like what they value, and then you sprinkle what you value and like what you think is important. But I would try to do like a variety of forms of assessment. So like instead of like pen and paper, like tests and exams and quizzes, I would do like exit slips, or maybe you can do like a creative movement piece, or like you kind of offer choice. So again, with the major projects, you would provide a rubric, or even like for a regular project, you would provide like maybe options. Okay, so like I'm going to be assessing you. Here's one rubric if you do the creative movement piece, or if you do an art piece. This rubric will apply to that art piece. Because I'm an arts ed person. Even in math, like I think that if you like the process, and like this is like hint, I'm going to ask you this question next.
Okay.
The process. The process might be slightly different, or it might be the same, but like the end product, did you get the right answer in the end? So depending on what subject it is and how much the assignment is worth, either sit down and co-create or just do a variety of forms and kind of like see what works, and also doing pre-assessment with your kids, like what do they like, what works for them, etc. So
good answer.
leading on that. So using the multimodal tools, or can you imagine yourself assessing students via dance or drama in a math class?
That's actually a really interesting question. And while I haven't thought much about that personally, being that I'm sort of social studies and inclusive ed, I certainly find that an interesting question and an interesting concept. I'll speak briefly about personal experience with that. So we lived in Colorado for 2.5 years, and within Loveland, Colorado, which is where our son went to elementary school, he went to a school which was called a LISA school. So the city we lived in was Loveland. So Loveland Integrated School of the Arts. And what they did there was they actually incorporated, it was part of their mandate, incorporated art into every subject, math obviously being one of those subjects. And what they would do, for example, in grade 3, if they were measuring surface area, they would make a skyline piece of art, which would they would take sort of black construction paper and measure it, and then they would make beautiful art pieces that would line the hallways of the school, and parents would come in for different viewings of the school's art. In terms of dance and drama, I don't think it's out of the question. I think it would be totally engaging. I would have to sit and figure out how that would look, but I can certainly see the merit in that for sure.
I think like kind of building off of that too, like you could incorporate drama, like say those word problems, like if there are 6 cows, how many legs do they have if you took away 2 cows and added a squirrel? Like even though the questions can be ridiculous and not really real life, I'm just thinking of the time when we did a reading or a video, and the person on a talk show was talking about the pineapple, the talking pineapple, like how I'm just rambling on now. Like word problems can be ridiculous, but you could act out like, hey, so you get like 6 people, and they're like moo moo, like we're cows, and then 2 go away, and then 1 squirrel comes in, and it's like you can physically, visually, like visualize it, so you can count and add up how many legs the animals have to get your answer.
I think that's a good point, because sometimes people have a hard time, and I was certainly one of those math learners. I had a hard time visualizing concepts that were 2-dimensional.
Yeah.
So something written on a piece of paper,
Yeah.
I had a hard time conceptualizing what that actually meant. So if we actually had people enact or represent certain parts of a short story, or a word problem, I think it would certainly speak to not just the Callies of the classroom, but to others as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I sometimes, when it comes to traditional forms of assessment, I mean, and how much is too much, I often go back to that question of a little person getting a history or an English paper back, and it's absolutely covered in red pen. I mean, how deflating is that?
I always like worried about that.
Absolutely. I mean,
like why red of all things?
Why red of all things, and
why not like a typed up feedback sheet
to accompany it, for sure.
Yeah, like red is just intimidating.
It is intimidating, and I mean, depending on the teacher and their particular style, I mean, are they trying to penalize, or are they trying to give constructive feedback? Yeah, that's something I always grappled with.
Okay. Yeah. Whose turn is it?
I'm going to, yeah. Okay. To ask or to?
To ask.
Okay.
Pass.
Okay. So students in the same classroom will often learn at different rates. And how do we assess where they are at the beginning of the course and then throughout?
Pre-assessments. So I think that if we have like something that's like not even for marks, like little sheets, like name, interest, like qualities. If you have like, there's this book on differentiated instruction that I had for my pre-internship year last year. They have tons of examples of like worksheets that you can give your students, and then you take that information and you base like your units kind of based on like what the needs are and personalities of your students are. And it kind of leads into something I talked about in my individual video, as well as something that Callie talked about, that you talked about in your video, about the geography curriculum from 1964. Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. So like it's like suggested activities. It's like you can't just use this for every year, because every year you get different students with different needs and different personalities. So I think pre-assessment is really important. I don't like each year, and even if you get a new student, pre-assessment and then go from there. Because just with suggested activities, especially for students in the 1960s, like no offense, but I don't think they had technology really. Yeah. Or like that's very different, like different times and different literacies going on today versus back then. So it's just like assuming you make an ass out of you and me when you assume.
It also makes me wonder, as a pre-service teacher, how many generations of students before today's student were turned off by education. We still have students that are slipping through the cracks, but I mean, when there was
Why are we doing this? It's not even important. I'll tell you, I used the Pythagorean theorem for flooring in my boyfriend's grandma's house.
Good for you.
Yeah, that's like elementary math. It does come.
He better keep a hold of you. Hang on to this one. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, back in the day, there could have been visual learners, there could have been auditory learners, but there was only really one way to test, and that would have been to grind out, paper and pencil and
multiple choice, true, false.
Exactly. And for all those, multiple intelligences. People, I mean, that's all the buzzword now, and we're differentiating left, right, and center. But back in the day, I mean, who knows?
Like nowadays, it's about process and product, not just product. And I think that we also touched on that in our videos or like in the class as well. Like, some people take different ways to get to the end of their path, and that's totally okay. Because who's to say what is right and what is wrong? And even in math, like you can get the answer using different processes, different steps. And I know some people get marked wrong, but it's like I would have done it the same way that they did. So does that make me wrong? Like process over product.
As long as you're thinking about what you're doing,
and not just like willy-nilly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, I agree with you, Nicole. Like in life, is there only one way to think and only one way to come to the same result?
And I think that's what this class has taught us. Like there's the answer to that is no, there's not one way. Here's all these other opportunities and options you can do when you assess. So exit slips, KWL charts, placemats, think, pair, share, traditional assessment and like non-traditional assessment, how things are shifting, and that's what I found useful.
Absolutely. And also within our classrooms, with inclusion being so done, so hot right now within the class, today's classroom, how do we go about assessing and having students with communication disorders, for example, or learning difficulties self-assess? I mean, we shouldn't just look at that student population, for example. I'm just choosing that one particular population, and just assume that, they don't know how to self-assess. I mean, I don't buy that at all.
And that's sad. When you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. Don't underestimate just because someone may have autism or may have a speech impairment. Like, you can't just think for them.
Exactly.
You can't think for them.
Exactly.
So you gotta find different ways. Like if they're good with numbers, maybe ask like number-based questions, but also if they like to do art, like have them like communicate through art. You have to like, it's not just about the teacher. The teacher has to meet the needs of their students.
Absolutely. And as educators, we know that every student has their strengths, and we should capitalize and build upon the strengths.
And that's where pre-assessment comes in handy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You got it, girl.
So one question for you.
Okay.
The way you assess students should reflect as closely as possible what you want them to learn. Can you expand on this quote? And would you want every student to learn the same thing or something meaningful to them that they can connect to?
Okay, so the way I would assess students would have to tie closely to the outcomes within the curriculum or the IIP. We have to ultimately assess towards something common, something that's a standard for all students.
So that's what's provided in the curriculum.
Yeah, the outcomes. And I would ultimately want to assess students toward that, but the how we go about assessing and how each student would come to that understanding would vary. Absolutely. But I do believe that we are ultimately guided by those provincial documents. And how we go about getting there with each student would be different. I mean, it's an exciting time to be a teacher, and I think it's an exciting time to be a student within today's classrooms.
Do you, just to go further with that question, do you feel that perhaps maybe there's like knowledge or maybe like life skills, or I don't know what the word is for it, that we are also obligated to teach? Like, for example, manners is a good example.
Absolutely.
I guess it falls into like respect to your students and like the core values of your specific school that you're at.
Totally. Everything has to tie towards something that's a guiding principle or an overarching theme. But I mean, that's like one of the biggest 21st century core competencies is playing nice with others, right? We have to respect and acknowledge others' abilities, cultures. We can't assume that our way of thinking is the only way of thinking.
Yeah.
And collaborating and networking, these are all buzz terms for today's competencies.
But you wouldn't assess, like, you would just assess what's in the curriculum. Like, you wouldn't be like, oh, so-and-so was polite today. Like, you would recognize that and say, oh, Johnny, like, you're polite today. Like, good job. That's an improvement. But technically, like, that separate category would not fall under a grade. It's just common sense. You get what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And I think with within the younger students, for example, I think actually socialization is actually, you're either meeting it or you're progressing towards it.
Yeah.
Or it's developing. So, and it's kind of funny I've got 4 sons. Within each of them, I wasn't as worried about their academics as I was more about socially how they interacted with others. Because
that's what's going to really be the deal breaker.
It is. I mean, somebody can be a genius, but if they're if they're unsocial and uncoachable, I mean, to use a sports term, I guess.
Yeah.
Is that necessarily or do you want to take a person who, is
willing to try, willing to be friendly, willing to learn?
Exactly.
I'd go for the second person.
Yeah, I would too, for sure.
Okay.
I'm going to shoot one at you here, Nicole.
Okay.
So, how do you go about teaching students to properly and honestly self-assess? I mean, the tendency might be to say, "Oh yeah, I know I'm the perfect student, and I want to work with my best friend, and my best friend is my best friend, and I'm not going to give them I'm going to be more generous with their grade in terms of peer assessment than I would be with somebody that I don't get along with necessarily." So how do you as a teacher navigate your students through that?
Well, one quote I would throw out there for sure is if you cheat the system or cheat and just give 100% A's everywhere, you cheat yourself, because it doesn't teach you. You need to be honest in your assessment. You're going to get in the workplace. I would explain, like, I would have a whole period, not a whole period, but like a good chunk of time explaining, okay, like, it's important to be honest, because you get to a job and someone, say if your friend recommends you for the job, but you are not good at the job and you have poor work ethics, and your friend says, oh yeah, like, they work 110% all the time, but you're just lazy, for example, it's not going to look good for you or your friends. So you got to think about, okay, am I being honest? What can I improve on? Self-reflect. It's okay to not be perfect. No one's perfect. So I kind of explain it to them, but say if you cheat the system, you cheat yourself, because in the long run, if you're not honest, you're not going to get very far, because you're not willing to take that constructive criticism and you already think that you're perfect.
And I can really appreciate your answer, because, and thank you for that, Nicole, because that's something that I've grappled with myself. I mean, I tend to be more critical with my self-reflection.
Yeah.
But when I'm giving a peer assessment, I don't want to hurt that person's feelings.
I know, yeah.
So it's really hard.
But it's about teaching resilience and what's the other word? Critical, like taking that criticism constructively.
Yeah.
Good answer. Don't be rude and say, oh, this is all bad. Do a compliment sandwich, for example, and be keep it positive, but yet constructive, critical.
Love it.
Okay, is it my turn to ask you one?
Mm-hmm.
We kind of covered a lot of it, yeah.
Oh, do you want to talk about the first question, which was a good one?
Oh, I like how you say the learning experience is in control for the students, but do you agree that sometimes things are learned unintentionally?
Absolutely. I absolutely agree that things are sometimes learned unintentionally, and to be honest, sometimes I think that's the best learning.
Yeah.
we talked about the 21st century competencies, and those I often think are those unintentional learnings. So, for example, people-centric collaboration and trust and networking with others. Those are some of those unintentional learning pieces that you will come away with. And we talked about that earlier, about how those are arguably some of the most important qualities that a person can possess, and whether or not they're born with it or whether or not that they are conditioned to become pleasant to work with and can take, some constructive criticism. Those are all pieces that will help to create a holistic person, and those are all pieces that I think would certainly benefit anybody within the 21st century workplace.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it.
I think we've pretty much jammed this out together between this and our individual reflections.
Yeah.
I think we've covered it. I mean, this has been a good class. It's been, your readings have been really good. I really appreciate it. And Nicole and I were talking about this, the videos and the articles that you posted.
Yeah. They're easy to read and not too dense, and the videos are a nice visual component. Or the videos are a nice visual component. So I don't know for sure, like I appreciate the videos and the easy reads, but yeah, I could see like me like archiving them and using them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.